Hey everyone, ready to dive deep. Today we're tackling something we all do but rarely really think about. Learning.
It's amazing, right?
Totally. We've got some really cool research to unpack, all about the science behind learning. I'm pumped to see how these brains of ours actually work as these crazy learning machines.
It is remarkable. I mean, we take it for granted so often, but then you start peeling back the layers and whoa, it's pretty mind-blowing what's happening in there.
Right. And what's really cool is we're not just looking at what we learn, we're going to look at the how, like the mechanics of how our brains make sense of everything around
Like
us.
we've each got the simulator in our heads,
Yeah.
constantly trying to make sense of things.
Exactly. So it's not just about memorizing facts and figures.
It's our brains building these intricate models to simulate reality.
Oh, that's interesting. Like Stanislas Dehaene talks about, right?
Yeah.
In how we learn.
So it's not just storing information, it's constructing these representations of the world constantly. Can you give us an example of how these mental models, what they actually do? Sure. Think about language, like learning a new word. It's not just memorizing the sound and the definition.
Right.
You're putting that word into your entire model of language, understanding how it relates to other words, the grammar, the subtle shades of meaning.
Wow. Yeah. So these models aren't just for navigating a room, they're for understanding abstract concepts, whole systems even.
Exactly. They help us make sense of everything, from basic sensory stuff to like complex scientific theories. We predict what's going to happen. We understand cause and effect. It goes way beyond just absorbing facts.
Makes sense. Like our brains are building these simulations all the time to help us figure out the world.
It's made me think about all this AI buzz lately. Everyone's talking about how AI learns, but how does it really compare to the human brain?
It's a really fascinating comparison. AI has come a long way, especially with recognizing patterns, processing data, but there are these big differences in how they learn, AI and humans. For example, AI needs tons and tons of data to learn. Humans, we can learn from just a few examples. Yeah. Think of a kid learning the word dog. They don't need to see thousands of dog pictures like some algorithm, a couple examples, and they get it. They can apply it.
That's it. That's one of the key things. Humans are so good at applying what they know to new situations, even to abstract concepts. Imagine trying to teach AI to get a metaphor or understand social stuff.
Yeah, the nuances.
Exactly. Humans still have the edge there.
So it's not just about raw processing power. It's about cognitive skills, social interaction, emotional intelligence. All that makes human learning so unique. And speaking of learning, we're not born knowing calculus or Shakespeare, right? So how does education actually change our brains?
Now, that's where it gets really interesting. Education doesn't just fill our brains with facts, it literally changes how they're wired. Take literacy, for example. Learning to read, that doesn't just give us access to information, it changes how we process visual information. Specific parts of our brains, like the visual cortex, the areas that deal with sound, they actually change because we learn to read.
That's incredible. So education doesn't just add knowledge, it enhances our abilities at a structural level.
Yeah. And it's not just reading. Think about math. Education helps us move from like a few and many to really understanding numbers.
Oh, interesting.
And that understanding, that's the basis for complex math, for science, for technology.
It's kind of amazing how these educational experiences can have such a huge impact on our brains,
Yeah.
how we understand the world. But what about teachers? I mean, we've all had them, the good, the bad. What makes a human teacher so unique, so effective, compared to, say, a computer program or a textbook?
That's a great question. One of the biggest things is that we can understand each other's minds. As humans, we get when someone's not getting it, and we change how we teach right there in the moment. We can give explanations tailored for them, encourage them, create a good learning space.
You know what? That reminds me of my high school history teacher. She was incredible. She just knew how to explain things in a way that made sense to me. It's like she could see right into my brain and knew exactly how I needed to learn.
That's it. That's the power of human connection, understanding how the student is thinking, adapting to them to help them understand. It's not about just giving information. It's about both of you truly understanding, building a love of learning. It really is something, huh? That human connection in teaching. Like we just intuitively sense how someone else is learning.
Totally. It's like there's this unspoken language between teacher and student. You can
Yes.
feel those aha moments or when someone's totally lost. It makes me wonder, though, if human teaching is so powerful, are there limits to what we can learn? Is there like a ceiling to our brain power?
That's a question that's been around forever. Philosophers, scientists, they've all been trying to figure that out. Honestly, we're still learning. We keep discovering more about how adaptable the human brain really is.
So we're not just stuck with the capacity we're born with. Our brains can actually keep growing, changing throughout our whole lives.
Exactly. It's called neuroplasticity, one of the most exciting areas of neuroscience right now. Seeing how the brain rewires itself, forms new connections, all based on experience. It means we can learn way more than we probably think we can.
That's so encouraging. It means that no matter how old you are, where you come from, you can keep learning, keep growing. But then, if our brains are so adaptable, why do some people seem to pick up things way easier than others? Like some people just seem to get math, others not so much.
That's a great question, and it shows just how much is going on when we learn. It's not just one thing. Our genes, what happened to us as little kids, the environments we're in, our motivation, all of it plays a part.
So it's not about having a smart brain or not. It's this whole mix of nature and nurture that makes us who we are as learners.
That's it. And that's why it's so important to understand that there's no single best way to learn. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay. It's about finding what clicks for you, what plays to your strength.
I like that. So instead of trying to squeeze everyone into the same box, we should celebrate all the different ways people learn.
Absolutely. That diversity in learning, it's a good thing. When we have lots of different viewpoints, different approaches, everyone learns better.
That makes sense. It's recognizing that we all have different strengths, different challenges when it comes to learning. Okay, but how do we take all this cool brain science and use it to actually make education better?
That's where the real payoff is. When we understand how our brains learn best, then we can build schools and classrooms that work with our brains, not against them. We can move away from rote memorization, from just sitting there passively. Instead, we build environments that help kids really understand, think critically, and love learning.
So less about drilling facts, more about getting kids excited, engaged, wanting to learn and figure things out on their own.
Exactly. We can use that amazing brain plasticity by creating environments that are full of language where kids interact, get to try things hands on, encourage them to ask questions, explore ideas, see mistakes as a chance to learn.
That sounds a lot more fun than the way most of us were taught. It's about giving students the power to direct their own learning. But what about people who aren't in school anymore? Like, is it too late for us to use these ideas to be better learners?
No way, not at all. It's never too late. One of the biggest things we can do is just be aware of how our own brain learns. When we understand the basics, then we can figure out our strengths, the things we struggle with, try different ways of learning, create the right environment for ourselves.
So whether it's a new language, a skill, just learning more about something we're interested in, knowing about the science of learning can really help us.
Absolutely. It's like having the instruction manual for your brain. Once you know how it works, you can get so much more out of it. And the cool thing is, the more you learn, the better your brain gets at learning.
It's like this positive feedback loop. The more you learn, the easier it gets to learn more. But these days, with so much information everywhere, it can feel overwhelming. Where do we even start? Got any practical tips to help us be better learners every day?
Definitely. The biggest one, be curious and have a growth mindset. That means being open to challenges, not scared of messing up. Learning is a journey. It's not about being perfect, it's about constantly growing.
It really is all about how you approach it, huh? Being curious, being okay with challenges. But what about learning styles? That's a big one, right?
Mm.
Some people are visual learners, others learn better by listening or doing things.
You know, that's something so many people believe, but the research actually says it's not really true. We all have preferences. Some ways of learning might feel more fun, but our brains, they don't actually work differently based on those learning styles.
So it's not about finding the one right way to learn based on your style. It's more about using different approaches and seeing what works best for you in each situation.
Exactly. The more we challenge our brains with different experiences, engage with information in lots of ways, the stronger those connections in our brains get, and we learn better. It's like building pathways in your brain. The more pathways you have, the better you learn and adapt.
That makes sense. So instead of worrying about whether you're visual or auditory or whatever, we should focus on making learning more diverse, like using lots of different experiences.
Exactly. Think about little kids, how they learn. They're always exploring, touching things, listening, asking questions. They're using all their senses. That's the kind of learning we should be aiming for, no matter how old we are.
It's about making learning a whole brain experience, not just one part of the brain. And speaking of using our brains, these days it's so hard to focus. There are distractions everywhere. How do we get that focus and attention we need to really learn?
That's a huge problem now, isn't it? Notifications, social media, trying to do a million things at once. Our attention is pulled in so many directions. But all the research says focused attention is key. It's how we build those brain connections, how we remember things long term.
So it's not enough to just be around information. We have to actually be present with it, really paying attention.
That's it. One thing you can do is create a space just for learning. No phone, no distractions, just quiet. Somewhere you can really dive into what you're trying to learn.
That's such a good tip. It's so easy to get pulled away by everything going on. But creating those boundaries, that seems crucial to really learn deeply. What about mistakes? Where do those fit into the learning process?
Mistakes are super important. Honestly, they're some of our best teachers. When we mess up, our brain is saying, hey, there's something you don't understand here. It's a chance to rethink things, try a different approach, and learn more deeply.
So we shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes. We should see them as a sign that we're learning.
Exactly. It's that growth mindset. Learning is always ongoing. It's not about being perfect. It's about those mistakes. They help us grow.
Love that. It takes the pressure off, right?
Yeah.
Makes it okay to try, to experiment, to not get it right the first time. We've covered so much today. The brain, learning strategies, all kinds of cool stuff. What's the one big takeaway you want to leave people with?
I think it's this. We are all lifelong learners. It doesn't matter how old you are, what you already know. Our brains can keep learning, keep growing. Don't lose that curiosity. Keep exploring and learning. The world is full of amazing things to discover.
That's really inspiring. It's a reminder that learning isn't just about facts. It's about broadening our minds, understanding ourselves and the world better. It makes us better people.
Yeah, it's a journey, and the journey itself is just as amazing as what you learn along the way.
Well said. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling ready to learn something new right now. Hopefully our listeners are too.
Me too. This has been a great deep dive into learning.
It has. And speaking of exploring new things, there's another podcast we think you might like. It's called Wealth of Words.
Yeah, it's a really great show for anyone who loves learning and exploring all sorts of cool topics.
So be sure to follow and share Wealth of Words podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us on this amazing journey.